Foreclosures are up in Southern California. Is it time to grab the lifeboats for the foreclosure wave? Not quite. We're going to show you what numbers are increasing for foreclosures and which numbers are actually decreasing and explain why. Which loans do we need to track because we are seeing people behind on payments. And stick around to the end for the clickbait killer. We are going to show you exactly how many loans need to be behind in order to have crazy numbers of foreclosures. Hey there. Christian Walsh, real estate agent with Wire Associates. We've been helping the smartest buyers and sellers make the best data-driven decisions in this crazy market. It's time for the Southern California Foreclosure Report. Diving into the foreclosure data for Southern California, we're going to look at notices of default, notice of trustee sale, and REO properties. So remember, you miss a payment and 120 days later, notice of default can be filed. 90 days later, you can do the notice of trustee sale, and then 21 days later is the trustee sale itself, potentially. Doesn't always go that fast, but that's as quickly as it can go. And we're looking at Februaries, and of course, some Februaries have 28, some have 29, and we have 3 leap years in the data that we'll be covering here tonight, including 2024, the leap year, most recent. And we're looking at notices of default, the first stage of foreclosures. And what do you see when you look? Well, you can see that LA, they're up. And if we look at years past, so 2021, 2022, numbers were down because we had a foreclosure moratorium in place. So foreclosures were significantly down in February's in 2021, 2022. And then comparing to more normal years, yes, any given year, there are going to be foreclosures. The only time you have no foreclosures or almost zero foreclosures is when you have a foreclosure moratorium that shuts everything down. And we can see that we are up. So in some respects, we're catching up for past foreclosures. So we were down on the notices of default. So we're now catching up. So we can see LA has more than it has in years past, and same with the other counties we're covering. Should we be alarmed when we see this many? Well, we obviously are going to keep tracking to see where it ends up. But when we compare it to 2011, at a time when notices of default were actually dropping at that point in time, we can see that we're below those numbers. Now let's look at the next phase of the foreclosure process, notices of trustee sale. So this is getting more serious here for the person who is not making payments. And these numbers aren't quite as extreme as we're seeing. So we can see that the numbers are up, but they're not any higher in some cases than they were in 2019 and definitely nowhere near where they were in 2015. Putting this into perspective, we can see that we are way off of former notices of trustee sale. There were almost 2,000 in 1 month, in the month of February of 2011 in LA, a lot of notices of trustee sale. Looking at REOs, real estate owned. So these are properties that have gone back to the bank. And in many cases, we're seeing almost none. Ventura's only had 1, and we can see that San Diego's for LA, even with as many properties as there are, that number's way down. So it is not translating into an increase in the number of REO properties. 2015, you can see in LA, there were 172 properties that went back to the bank. And then more normal years of 2018, 2019, 2020, we can see that we're pretty close to those numbers. So not an abnormal number of properties kicking out the other end. And then when you compare it to where things were in 2011, 1,600 properties went back to the bank in 1 month. Now, 1,600 is a crazy number of properties going back to the bank in 2011, but don't forget that a lot of the properties were being purchased by third parties at foreclosure sale. So there were still flips and people buying and holding. So those are ones that didn't become REOs. And then there's other properties like the homeowner decided to just hand over the deed. So a deed in lieu, it wouldn't be tracked in the REO process here. Those were a separate part of the process. And then the other thing to remember is we had a solid short sale program in place, which meant that many folks who are behind on payments could go ahead and sell their property on the open market. The lender went ahead and forgave the additional mortgage amount that was owed. So this 1,600 properties in LA was just a tiny fraction of what was on the market and what was coming to the market. Very, very different days from what we see now, and we're nowhere near those levels of bank-owned properties. And this is part of the reason properties aren't kicking out as bank owned today. This is from Black Knight, and this shows homeowner equity for mortgage residential properties. This doesn't include properties that are owned outright, all cash. These are properties that have a mortgage on them, and we can see that the tappable equity is the light blue. So in other words, if people were to tap into that equity and leave a cushion of 20%, that's how much they'd have, and the other equity would be that 20% cushion. 2023 ended with $16 trillion of equity, and $10.3 trillion was tappable. Crazy levels of equity, and that's part of the reason folks who do get behind on payments, they can go ahead and still sell their property. Most of them still have plenty of equity, get it on the open market, and walk away with money in their pocket, instead of what we saw in the global financial crisis, where a lot of folks didn't have equity. We can see this dip here. That was a low level of equity for folks, so you continue to see your property lose value the longer you waited to sell and the further you got behind on payments. Now, we did show you that there are definitely notices of default going out. We've seen an increase. We're seeing that in the February numbers. So this report from Black Knight shows that it happens to be majority FHA and VA loans that are seeing the increase in delinquency and missed payments. The GSE, so Fannie and Freddie backed loans and portfolio loans, they seem to be performing relatively okay at this point in time. Additionally, an interesting trend to track is the delinquency rate of mortgages originated 6 months ago. So these newer mortgages, we're seeing in the FHA and VA loans an increase in the delinquency rate. We'll definitely keep tracking that. And here it is, the Foreclosure Clickbait Killer. Whenever you see any recent clickbait or doom talk around foreclosures, I want you to remember this chart right here. Subscribe to our email newsletter. You'll get a copy of this. This puts it into perspective, shows you how many loans we need to be behind on payments in order to get to crazy levels of foreclosures. Will we see a wave of foreclosures? Well, according to Black Knight, and this is tracking December's all the way back to 2000, these are the total non-current loans. So these are loans that are late period, 30, 60, 90 days in the foreclosure process. This shows you the number of loans total across the United States. We could see low numbers in the 2 million. So again, any given market has a certain level of delinquent loans. Let's skip this part over here. We'll talk about that for a second. And then we go over to 2017, 18, 19. This big spike in 2020, what was that? Well, that was the forbearance program. So a lot of folks went into that forbearance program, whether they were actually had lost their job or not. Some did it preemptively, and we can see that we had a huge spike and people were worried, but then those numbers dropped. And then we can see the numbers drop into 2021, 2022, and 2023. We're at 2.12 million loans, which looks very similar to some of these low days back in the early 2000s. And this isn't related to foreclosure moratorium. This is actually a count of loans that are delinquent, whether they're in foreclosure or not. And that is down. Now, of course, we'll track it and see what happens. To give you perspective, look at the number of loans that were behind in 2006, 2007. So we definitely had a problem. Global financial crisis, people talk about 2008. We were already at almost 6 million non-current loans, and it only got worse from there. So that's what you need in order to kick out 1,600 REO properties in LA in the month of February like we saw. You need this level of non-current loans. And as you can see, we're not even close to getting to that point, but we'll keep tracking it. If you're looking to score a deal on a foreclosure, make sure you sign up at foreclosure.com. We have a link below and a link to all listed short sales and bank-owned properties in Southern California. You're tracking foreclosures in your neighborhood, right? Let us know in the comments below. The next thing you need to know is in this video right here. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Christian Walsh, real estate agent with Wire Associates, and we can't wait to hear from you.